What should creationists think about feathered dinosaurs?
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ken, for the opportunity for Matt and I to talk about this. It was really fun for us to be at ICC this past year, and for the two of us to be kind of up here giving this presentation, taking a lot of questions, and there's just loads of really great conversation that happened at that. I really appreciate the audience. We probably had 250 some odd people, maybe 300 in the auditorium at the time. So really good pointed questions. So if you've got some questions out there and you're wondering, hey, this is your chance to talk to a couple of creation paleontologists. So definitely hop in there. Thanks for the questions so far. So I'm going to take the next two topics, but again, there'll be a break in between them. The first part that we're going to be looking at here are what is a feather, right? So kind of the impetus behind bringing this presentation is there's a lot of controversy amongst creationists about whether or not dinosaurs have fossils, because people are worried that if dinosaurs have feathers, not fossils, if dinosaurs have feathers, because evolutionists have said that's evidence that dinosaurs evolved into birds, for example. And what Matt and I were trying to do with this is to say, well, we can still look at the data, and the data could say yes or no. My old PhD advisor, Dr. David Fostovsky, was talking to me about my research one time, and he said, the answer could be this, the answer could be that, and either answer is interesting. And I thought that was just so insightful that, here he had a particular way that he thought the data were going to fall out. But if they didn't, it would surprise him and he would find that interesting. So that is, some of what we're trying to bring here as we explore this. Do dinosaurs have feathers or not? So the first thing that we need to know is what is in fact a dinosaur. And Matt has walked us through some of those physical attributes that help us know what is and isn't a dinosaur. And so my task here now is going to be, well, what is a feather? And that intuitively you go, well, I know what a feather is. And it's like, well, we do, but there's also some really interesting stuff about feathers and types of feathers that we don't ever think about or really see. So a feather scientifically is what we consider to be an integumentary structure. And what that means is it grows up out of the skin. So skin is integument. It's sitting out on top of the muscles and things like that. And it's therefore anchored to the skin and not to the bone. So when you find feathers in the fossil record on a bird, for example, they'll go close to the bone, but not exactly onto the bone. That's not where they're coming from. They're not bony material. They are hollow structures that follow more or less kind of a hierarchical branching. You can think of, for some of you math nerds, fractals, right? How it branches this way, and it's kind of the same sort of branching, just getting smaller and smaller. Feathers do a lot of the same thing. They're hollow all the way through, both at the base and out towards the very tips of the feather. And they're composed primarily of what's called keratin. That's a type of protein. And in particular, they are composed of what's called beta keratin. So keratin is a group of proteins that can be arranged in different kinds of ways. Alpha keratins are built by us, for example. Our fingernails, our hair are built out of things called alpha keratins. And that's when the keratin structures are built in like these helices, these kind of spiral staircase structures. Feathers are made of keratin, but their arrangement is different. They build keratin with these really strong bonds between the keratin molecules, and then they stack them like plates, a whole bunch of them. And they're really tight. A recent paper that was just published about 2 weeks ago is kind of redefining the terms and calling them corneaceous beta keratins. They're getting kind of specific here. Everybody's just called them beta keratins for a long time. But in any event, they're recognizing there is a structural difference in the way that beta keratins are made compared to alpha keratins. So claws and hair, yeah, they're made of keratin, but it's not the same construction of keratin that we see for things like feathers. And so feathers, I have a slight error here. It's not that they have no alpha keratin. They have sometimes some alpha keratin, but it's almost all these beta keratin plates that are being constructed together to form feathers. Now that's going to be important later on, because it turns out that there's some preserved biomolecules out there on some of these fossils. And if they're composed of alpha or beta keratins, that might help us figure out, are we looking at real feathers or are we looking at something else? So modern feathers are beta keratins, branching structures. They're hollow in the center. So here's a couple of different illustrations taken from the Cornell Bird Academy of different types of feathers. We're very familiar with wing feathers. And some of you might even know a saga by that name. Just a little joke for especially the folks who like some of the homeschool work out there. But anyway, the wing feathers are asymmetrical. They're not mirrored with a center. Rather than that, the shaft of the feather is towards the front, and then you've got a longer set of filaments on the side. So short filaments out front, longer filaments on the side. It's not running straight down the center. And that's for aerodynamic purposes. This helps with the airfoil that is the bird wing and for creating lift on the wing surface. Even on the tails, we've got a tail feather here. The tail feathers towards the very center of the tail are symmetrical, but the ones towards the edges actually look a little bit like wing feathers in that they are not symmetrical, especially if they are helping the bird to fly. So you've got those types of feathers, and those are what we often think about feathers. We often remember down feathers also. These are the feathers that are deep underneath and inside or close to the body, and they're keeping the bird warm. They're fuzzy, fluffy, kind of chaotic. The fibers are going everywhere, and they're really good at trapping air in between all of those fibers and keeping the bird's body warm. And that's very important because birds actually run at higher body temperatures than mammals do. Right, our normal body temperature is 98.6, give or take. And mammals can be a little bit lower than that, some a little bit warmer than that, but we're almost all in the we're all in the 90s pretty much. Birds, on the other hand, are typically running around like 103, 104, 105 degrees. Their body is tuned at a higher temperature. All their enzymes, their proteins operate at these higher temperatures that for us would actually be rather dangerous. And so they need to keep in their body heat in order to maintain their body temperature. Down is really, really good at this. What are some of the other ones? So we got the wing and the tail feathers. We got the down feathers. Well, the contour feathers, you've probably seen these as well, sometimes shed by the birds because as feathers are in the skin, they regrow. And so they will drop their feathers. You've probably heard of the term molting, right? So they molt the feathers, they release them out. Contour feathers are the feathers that cover the body of the bird. They're over the chest, the abdomen, they're over parts of the face, along with these things called semi-plume, which are kind of halfway between a contour and a down sort of thing. So you can see we got kind of a range. Then out on the right-hand side, we have these bristle feathers and phyloplumes. These are the ones that are really interesting and kind of weird because they're like single shafts, just like the center of a wing or a tail feather, for example. And with the bristles, they have a couple of little fuzzies down at the very base, but it's pretty much kind of like a hair. And for a lot of animals, they're around the face. So they operate kind of like whiskers in a sense. They're sensory connected. There's going to be a bunch of nerves towards the base of those that will allow them to feel the movement of the wind or directions and things like that. Phyloplume are interesting. They're a long single bit of feather up until the end, and then it just tufts out a tiny little bit. And these are buried in and amongst all of the contour feathers. The scientists aren't entirely sure what their full purpose is, but it's probably for keeping track of how the rest of the feathers are doing. Maybe acting as a sensory device there, like hairs in the middle of them that might be able to sense, I've got an insect that's crawling on me or something like that. So here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different feather types that are all found on any given modern bird. Just about every bird is going to have all of these. The only exception might be symmetrical wing feathers not being found on birds that are flightless, for example, or something like a penguin is going to have a very different sort of feather. So just to orient them on the body again, we've got our remiges and redices. Those words in blue refer to the wing feathers, remiges, and the redices, that's a science term for the tail feathers. The body feathers and the phyloplume, out there again on the chest area of the animal, bristles out towards the face, and then you're down, another one called powder down, the specialized version of the down feather that tend to shed a lot. And they produce large amounts of, kind of like dandruff in a sense, like feather dandruff. And, that might be for kind of housekeeping, keeping things clean and stuff like that. So these are another example of where these different types of feathers are going to be. So we typically kind of define or divide the feathers into the veined ones, which are going to be our flight feathers on the wings, and the ones on the tail, the remiges and the redices. These have the vein, and again, the vein on the wing feathers is off towards the front. The ones on the tails can be either towards the side or down the middle, and then the body feathers are always straight down the middle. And we refer to these as closed feathers because they have a little hook and grab system, what's called a hook and barbule. It's basically a little loop and a little hook, and it acts a lot like Velcro to hold the feather in a particular shape. And if you're a kid and you remember picking up a feather that you found at the playground or out in the driveway or the backyard, or you found a nest, right? These are the sorts of ones that you can kind of muss them all up and then draw your finger across them, and then they go back. And that's the hooks and the barbs that are able to easily release, but also hook back together again. On the body feathers don't have barbules, though, especially for those that we see in flightless birds. I got a picture here of a cassowary feather. So cassowaries are these flightless birds from places like Indonesia. They have a nasty disposition. They're really terrifying animals, actually. They're about the size of a person. They have this big, huge spike on their foot that's like a 6-inch long claw. They even have these modified feathers that are just the veins, and they're hooked, so they look like three or four claws coming off of the feather itself. And actually, they also have a couple of very tiny claws at the end of their fingers that are making up the wing structure, or the bone of the wing structure. But what's really cool here is their body feathers have a vein that splits off and creates a V shape, which is really neat. And you can hopefully see here that there's a lot of space between the bristles on either side of the veins. And that's because these ones don't have that hook and barbule system to keep it all together. So they can fray around quite a bit because the animal's not flying. It doesn't need to have its feathers stay as a nice tight pack around the body because it's not experiencing cooling from flying through the air like other birds do. The feathers that don't have veins are things like the down. And so here's a nice close-up of your down feathers, and you can see that just chaos. There's one little nub of what would grow into a vein if it was a different type of feather, but this is the little anchor point in the skin. And if you've got a nice down feather or down comforter, this is the part that occasionally pokes you. It sticks through the cloth and hits you. So it's an open structure as opposed to a closed one. There's no hook and barbules at all, anywhere. Everything just frays out in these little branching structures. Powder down sheds this material, and semi-plume has a very mild rachis in it, and then it kind of gets fluffy like this, but again, halfway between, say, something like down and the body contour feathers. Here's a nice image of some of those bristle feathers. So these are the ones that have basically just a single hair coming out straight from them. And these are very prominent on large birds. So you can see these on ostriches. If you look around their eyes, they look like these big eyelashes. Yeah, basically they are. They're feathers instead of hair performing the function of eyelashes. And in smaller birds like these flycatchers, we see them extend out pretty far, probably acting again like whiskers as these sort of sensory devices, because flycatchers literally do catch fly. These are animals that fly through the air to get their insects. And so they're fast, they're highly maneuverable, and they're probably using these feathers to help with directionality and quick movements as they fly through the air. Okay, so the next thing I want us to take a look at is, what is it that feathers look like when we find them on fossil birds? So this is a image of a fossil bird called Hongangornis, longa cresta. So longi cresta means long crest. Yeah, it's got a big long crest going up over the top of its head. Not so easy to see maybe here, but right around where the letters N-O and N-A are, just underneath each of those, you might be able to see some light fibrous sort of gray, slightly darker than the gray around, say, to the left of the NO. So just underneath that and to the right, you see these fibers. These are feathers. These are going to be things like contour feathers that are over the face and the body. These aren't the wing feathers. These aren't the ones that have a really strong vein. And when they all get compressed during the process of fossilization, it ends up looking like a lot of hair, if you will. It gets kind of matted. There's also some towards the bottom around the throat where the two white lines pinch out at the bottom of the V. You can see some dark material down there. That's also impressions of feathers that are in the throat area. This is a very, very well preserved fossil bird from the lower Cretaceous units of China. So this is important because if we want to know whether dinosaurs have feathers, we also not only need to know what dinosaurs are and what feathers are, we also need to know what feathers look like when they're fossilized on birds, right? We want to make sure, first off, we've got birds and we know that they're birds, and therefore then we can say, okay, this must be what a feather looks like when it's been fossilized. Well, how do we know that they're birds, right? Well, for the most part, that's skeletons. And in a lot of the cases, most of the cases in the paleontological record, we don't have feathers on birds as fossils. The feathers are just delicate, and the process of fossilization didn't keep them. So, for example, here is a fossil bird that comes from Poland in Oligocene rock units, and its name is Avaraptor longicruis. And it's from a modern family, the Ascipteridae, and these are this is part of the group of birds of prey. So things like eagles and hawks and stuff like that is one of the families that includes those. So this one has no feathers. So how do we know that it's a bird? Well, it turns out that there's a lot of really good skeletal pieces that are preserved here. And down below, you can see in this gray box that there's a drawing of the skeleton, and there's all these letters around here. That's where the scientist identifies the various different types of bones that are found on that organism. And so, what are the sorts of things that we're going to see in birds that we're not going to see in other sorts of things? Well, we're going to be looking at things like the hand area. The hand area of a bird you've seen at any Thanksgiving dinner, right? Sticks out there. In fact, I just had turkey for dinner. We had a whole turkey, and so there's that really sharp wing at the end, and that's a fusion of bones in the hand and the wrist. In paleontology, we call this a carpometacarpus, which means a wrist bone plus hand and wrist bone stuff. Carpometacarpus. It's all fused in together. There's a lot of bones all kind of tight. Also at the foot, Dr. Matt McLain had mentioned the ankle of dinosaurs and birds has this simple hinge, this nice straight line pivot. And the foot bone area of a bird is what we call a tarsometatarsus. It's the midfoot bones, like the middle part of your foot, along with some of the ankle bones. They're all kind of fused in together. It makes for a single long strip, and then 3 toes stick out, or 4 toes stick out from that. So a tarsometatarsus is going to be found around the leg, and a carpometacarpus is going to be found at the hand. You're also going to have a large plate-like sternum, typically with a keel, a vertical spire coming out of it. And that's where muscles to operate the wings are going to anchor. There's a whole bunch of other stuff as well, but that gets, I think, us to the idea of the sorts of things that we would see carving a Thanksgiving turkey, right? You've got that breastbone that separates the two big halves of breast meat, and that's the sternum with its keel. And then you can take a look at the carpometacarpus. You probably won't see the tarsometatarsus because they cut that part off, and that's like the chicken foot or the turkey foot, and that's not there. You've got that lopped off so that you start at the drumstick, which is actually the tibia. That's your lower leg area. That's what you're seeing with the birds there. So these are the sorts of things that we're expecting to see from modern birds and from fossil birds. And so if we have something like Hongangornis over here, you might say, okay, how do you know it's a bird? It's because of the anatomy of modern birds that we can see in this fossil, and the anatomy of modern birds we can see even in fossil birds that don't have any feathers. So that brings us to a pause on this one, Ken. we're ready to hop back in and take any questions.
Okay, excellent. So let me bring you guys back up, and I'll just leave that. Hang on, let me remove that as well. So anyone, I don't have any questions up right now. If anyone has any questions, go ahead and ask them. I do have a question, and that would relate to, we saw all those different feathery structures. So in the fossil record, when it comes to dinosaurs, do we see the same kinds of feathers with dinosaurs?
Yeah, we're coming to that, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
And so, yeah, as we're going to come into the next one, the answer is going to be, yeah, we do see not just one feather type, but a variety of different types of feathers. And we might not be able to identify all of, say, the 7 or 8 feather types that are found on modern birds in dinosaurs, but mostly that's because of preservation. That's because the feathers get matted down on top of one another, and you can't always pick out one feather from another. Sometimes you get something beautiful like Archaeopteryx, where you can see all the individual wing feathers, but then around the body, there's just so many feathers, it's just fuzz. It's just one on top of the other. It would be like trying to pick out single strands of hair on a mammal fossil. Only around the edges can you do that. When you get around the body itself, it's impossible.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, I've got some questions coming in. Let me just pop this one up there. So were there feathered dinosaurs that could fly?
Yes and yes. There were feathered dinosaurs, and there are some that could actually fly. We're going to be looking at a couple of really crazy dinosaurs here in the next unit. So I'll hold my powder on that one, my powder down, I guess, on that one. And we'll be looking at a couple that, yes, could fly.
Okay, cool. There's
a
another
couple
one
others
here
that could glide, or that sort of thing. You had some that were fairly weak. You had other ones that were definitely flitting from tree to tree around.
Okay, excellent. Here's another question. It's possible that some dinosaurs lost their feathers when they grew and were replaced by scales.
That's a really good question. It's certainly possible. What's interesting is that there's been several papers recently, and actually Dr. Matt McLain had pointed me to a paper in a big compendium book about feather construction and things like this, and and some other recent papers that have come out. It's just really interesting what has been going on in terms of research. The gene sets to produce feathers versus scales in birds turn out to be the same things, tweaked in different ways. So this is why you can have, say, chicken breeds that have scaly feet versus crazy feather feet. I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of some of the chicken breeds out there that have like these giant feather dusters for feet. It's unnatural. This is the result of sin in the fall. We shouldn't be doing this. This animal's unfit. But they're kind of like,
people show those birds, they have like these competitions. So who's got the most feathery feet?
Yeah. It's amazing what humans will value. When we get really bored, it's like, can you imagine how this whole thing got started? My chicken's got more feathers on his feet than yours does. I can build a chicken that's made of nothing but feather. Right.
Mm-hmm. And I watched a show on that, and I'll tell you, it was fascinating. Some of these different feathery adaptations that these different chickens had.
There's a book you should get called Extraordinary Chickens, and it's mainly just photos of all these different breeds of chickens and the wild things that, like, the different ways that they look.
Okay, there's the plug for that book. Go ahead and read it.
Yeah, we raised chickens for a little while, but the only thing I cared about was eggs. I really, I don't care what color the chicken is. I don't care what color the egg is. I just want there to be an egg, and a larger one, if at all possible. So we got Rhode Island Reds and Leghorn crosses, and they gave you big old eggs almost every day. Some of them twice a day. Every once in a while, you get a duplicate. But so it turns out that the genes that control feather development on birds are also the genes that control scale development, and there's other regulatory genes that are feeding into that to determine basically whether or not you could put a scale or a feather here. And so theoretically, we could probably end up with chickens that were all scales. And what a terrifying thought that is.
That is very scary.
But from a production standpoint, hey, then you don't have to defeather the chickens. You don't have to pluck them. But then again, then you're dealing with like this armored chicken that I'm not sure anybody would buy. So I don't know.
Let's not give people ideas.
That's fascinating.
Anyone has got to swing the other way sometimes, Matt, right? We got too many feathers. Now we're going to get nothing but scale chickens.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I didn't know that about the scales. I know they had scales on their feet, but I didn't know that they were so close, that connection between feathers and scales.
You often see some scales around their eyes as well if you look real close.
Right. Okay.
But the skin itself is soft. The skin itself is non-scaly.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Well, look, let's go back to Matt. So, Matt, if you can stick your presentation up here.
Actually, I'll be taking the middle one, Ken.
Oh, you're taking this one.
Yeah, and then Matt's going to close it.
Okay, no worries. Then I will put your presentation back up here, and I will say goodbye. I mean, just for the time being, and let you go for it. So don't forget, everyone, if you've got questions, get ready for them. Go ahead and stick your questions there. And also for those who are watching afterwards, so we've got the live session. This is recorded. Go ahead and pound the like button and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell as well for easier access to more videos as they come along. Got to get that plug in there. Okay, I'm going to put you on now.
Sounds good. Hey, thanks. And yes, do subscribe to Creation Unfolding. This channel's awesome. Really, really enjoy it. Ken, you do a fantastic job with your videos. So keep them coming. We appreciate them.
Well, that's the end of part 2. Please make sure to join me with Dr. Marcus Ross again for part 3, where he actually goes into all the details and all of the different feathered dinosaur fossils. Now, before you go, please make sure to hit that like button, press the subscribe button, and ring the bell for easier access to more videos as I upload them. Look, if you want to give, there's a PayPal button in the description. That would be great. And of course, as always, I'd really appreciate prayer. Thank you and goodbye.